Hi everybody watching or listening. Very sorry about the mess up on the audio of the service, but here we go. Big welcome to everybody who's watching this online. Um, Today we're remembering Dad, David Phillips, who was born on the 15th of November in 1932, setting a November birth date precedent for most of the family. Despite my belief, aged 5, he did not live in a castle. As a child, he watched fascinated as steam trains sped past, and he developed a lifelong love of trains. Yes, he was a train spotter. Probably had an anorak as well. And because radio was the only form of entertainment in the home besides books, he learned to love the shows. He liked the Goons, and his humour was influenced by these and other early pioneers of British comedy. Forgive me if I have tried to inject some of that irreverence into today's memorial. I think Dad would have forgiven me. Age 7, the war began, and come 1970, because Hitler had decided to remodel London using bombs, he was evacuated to Luton, which in the olden days was outside of London. He stayed with this family for the duration of the war and learned the violin. In fact, he played in the Luton Youth Orchestra. After the war, he and his mother, Doris, went to live with a wealthy family in Hornchurch, where Doris was the nanny to the couple's only child. Travel was a big part of Doris's and Dad's life. Trains and buses around Britain and trips to Europe. He went to Austria and Paris with a youth contingent. There was nothing he loved more than to visit a city and just walk around for hours and hours and hours, as Stephen and I found out when we took him to Paris. He was called up for compulsory 2 years national service in 1951 and spent some of that time in the southern Germany in the Signal Corps as a radio mechanic attached to the Armour Corps, where they all waited patiently for the Russians, who, as we all know, failed to show. At the end of his service, disappointed at being so rudely stood up, David returned to London, where he eventually got a job with the BBC as a radio tech. For a while he worked in Norfolk, and this is where he met Jean Wilson, who was to become his wife of 67 years. They married in January 1959 and in November had me, their first son, and Chrissy, 2 years later. Both of us born in the bedrooms of a little farm cottage in Norfolk, which is still there, and I visited it 2 years ago. Richard followed 4 years later in Bryn Llydiard, therefore he's Welsh, which explains a lot. We moved around a lot with Dad, because Dad was in the BBC. We went to Carlton Road, Potter's Bar, Bryn Llydiard, Denbigh, Wyndham, and Bridgend. In fact, I remember a BBC party somewhere where we met a real Dalek. I had nightmares for weeks. But the British weather followed us wherever we went, and eventually it became just too much. Australia beckoned. So it came to pass that in October 1970 we set off as £10 Poms for the blue skies, sun and surf, and after a long flight on a 707 that stopped 3 times for fuel, we arrived. We had escaped. The promised land. You can see there, Kings Park, November 1970. I remember it distinctly. As a £10 Pom, Dad was sponsored for immigration by the ABC in Perth City. But on his very first day, somebody stopped him and told him about the private radio stations, that they paid better and were recruiting. So that lunchtime, Dad walked up to TVW Channel 7 in Tuart Hill and got a job with them that day as a radio technician in an exotic place called Katanning. 6 weeks later, we set off for the interior, deepest, darkest WA. It was but 1 week to Christmas, and strapped to the roof rack were 3 brand new push bikes, choppers no less. Our Christmas presents. Now these were the days long ago when you could drive down the Albany Highway, and Katanning is 270 kilometres away, and not see another car for 2 hours. So on this first trip we thought we were lost. Nowhere could be this far from civilization. But Mum and Dad were to remain in Katanning for the best part of 52 years. They became part of Katanning's life. Mum and Dad had joined the Baptist church and became born-again Christians. Dad was Dad was an elder and deacon in the church, and at 6WB he was in Rotary and joined the golf club, where he played regularly until his 80s. He helped in the setting up and maintaining of the Noongar radio station. He played soccer for a short time for the Katanning Italian team, and was often mistaken for Italian because of his swarthy looks, which we'll talk about later. Dad was deeply involved in the local amateur dramatics and entertained us on many occasions, even roping me in twice. He acted, he sang, and he directed. Dad worked at the local wireless station 6WB as a technician and later a manager till about 75, 76, when they became house parents at Marrybank Mission. Oh my goodness, the 70s, when style died. And looking after 11 Aboriginal boys. That was quite a challenge. Dad drove the school bus, as well as doing other jobs around the mission. While we were at the mission, Dad was given a job to do something at the gate, which was about 1 kilometre away from the main part of the mission, the houses. And while he was down there on the road on his own, a carload of Aboriginals stopped and asked directions to the superintendent's house. Dad gave them in his typical English accent, and off they went. They found John, and John asked them, "Oh, you got directions here?" "Oh, yes, we spoke to a fella at the gate." "Oh, okay, was he a Wodjala fella," which means white devil, or was he a Noongar fella, Aboriginal? "Oh, I know him a Noongar fella. He was a Noongar fella." So yes, Dad was an honorary Noongar. Yeah, so after the mission, Mum and Dad moved to the Mission Scatter House in Katanning townsite. He also worked as an orderly at Katanning Hospital, but after injuring his back, he drove school buses and taught driving lessons and music. He drafted house and shed plans and made signs from carved wood. He was a very versatile man. So, Dad had lifelong passions, and some of these were golf, trains, and music, and golf. And let's not forget golf. So when Dad retired, he was able to take up golfing full-time. His gopher, in fact, later was adapted to the task of caddying the clubs. Rain, sleet, and even 40 degrees days had little effect on the enthusiasm for the game. And when he finally retired his clubs and moved with Mum to Perth, he had a total of 5 full sets and nearly 20 spare clubs that he had collected over the years. I believe that he actually got the little white ball into the hole at least once in that time. And I must give a token mention to tennis, which he also played until he was 80. Dad was also a familiar figure as he tooled around town on his scooter, not surrendering his keys at gunpoint until his 80s. Then he had to be satisfied with a gopher, though it was not fast enough for his liking. It was, however, an improvement, as people could now outrun him to escape. And it would be remiss of me not to mention some of my personal memories of Dad. We had a difficult relationship, but that was because I was a difficult child. Impulsive. I didn't think of consequences. Just one story that comes to mind is at 6WB radio station, at the back of the house, we had a water tank, corrugated iron, very sturdy, very low, and that we acted as a header tank for the dam water that was for reticulation in the gardens. I decided that it would be a righteous idea to chisel the roof off the tank. Now, it was on a stand about 6 feet above the ground and level with the roof guttering. That's the top. So I chiseled this roof off whilst Dad was away, and he came back to find this seriously compromised water tank that had been half destroyed. So, yes, there were some difficult times. I mean, he did take me fishing. I have to say, he took me fishing. And as I swam back to shore, I thought to myself, I'm not sure Dad likes me. And of course, he took me golfing. And as I swam back to shore, I thought, golfing's a lot like fishing. The worst part was, of course, when I got my first girlfriend and Dad insisted on chaperoning us on my first date. And as we swam back to shore, she said to me, I don't think your dad likes you. No, seriously, he was at times very, very patient. Dad taught me electronic valve theory and transistor theory, and we made a transistor radio together from a kit. He was a great help later when I was studying engineering maths and calculus, as he had a good technical mind and understood such things. And after giving his life to God, he mellowed a lot. During a visit to our new residence in Wilson and Perth when I was studying at university, some people from up the road had a very violent set to, which resulted in the lady and the child sheltering from her partner in our house, with him outside screaming at her. I would have, and I was going to, resort to a big stick, but Dad used diplomacy and tact, invited the man in and diffused the whole situation. I gained an enormous respect for Dad from that. He was also good at public speaking and was my inspiration. If he could do it, I can do it. In 2010, Stephen and I took him back to Europe aged 77, and he was good company. Our apartment in Montmartre in Paris was an instant success, and this is the view from the window, because it overlooked the railway tracks leading out of the Gare du Nord. Stephen and I were not impressed. Dad was thrilled, absolutely thrilled. And that's a quote from Dad. Well, during our stay, we walked all over Paris and we wore Stephen out. He decided to take a day off when we were going to go to the Palace of Versailles. So it was just Dad and me. He and I walked around the 100 acres and saw everything, absolutely everything. We returned to the apartment in Montmartre by dusk by metro, and I was knackered. And to my amazement, my 77-year-old father ran up the long stairway to street level from the underground. Well, we had a lot of fun on that trip, and I became closer to Dad than I'd ever been before. It was the first and only time that Dad left Australia, and I'm very glad we went. Dad, never having known his father, resolved to learn something about his background. He did a DNA test, and lo and behold, it did transpire that Dad was half Indian, hence the dark complexion. I have no doubt that caused problems for him at school, but he never talked about it. So, for this reason, when Jennifer and I were in Britain, we were in the seaside town of Brighton, we bought him some Brighton Rock. It was curry flavoured. Dad loved it. I don't think he ate it, but he thought it was very funny. I could spend hours up here talking about Dad, but time takes its toll on all of us. Dad slowed down and became increasingly frail. He still enjoyed the company of his children. Now, this is an earlier one. I've entitled this one Road Rage. And especially the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren. And though his short-term memory became like that of a goldfish, we didn't mind if he forgot what we had just said. He always knew that we loved him. All good things come to an end, and mercifully Dad didn't loiter long at the bus stop between here and the life eternal. Dad died peacefully on the 18th of December, aged 93, with family at his side. Jennifer, my wonderful wife, was there holding his hand at the end. Well, I'm sure that if he could speak to us now, he would quote the epitaph of the great Spike Milligan. I told you I wasn't well. My dad.